let me know. So welcome. My name is Karen Walsh, and I welcome you warmly to Dealing with a Bad Boss, and to talk to you a little bit about some of the strategies and the tips that we have when we're dealing with bosses who might be what we regard as an ongoing nightmare. So if I just go into a little bit about me, if you wouldn't mind at this stage. Some of you, there's actually a lot of you on the line, and some of you I have met before, but there's many of you that I have not met before. So just by way of introduction, my name is Karen Walsh. I'm a business owner, and I do a lot of leadership development. I actually work across various continents, and so I work in Africa, I work in Papua New Guinea, I work in Fiji, and I work in Australia, and absolutely love what I do. I do a lot of coaching of executives and people down the line. I have formerly been a university lecturer. I'm a psychologist by training, and I absolutely love what I do. So I won't say too long about me and what I do, but more about how we're going to deal with these people who can be ongoing nightmares in a workplace. I've been developing leaders to grow organizations for, I hate to admit it, but almost 3 centuries. That's pretty scary, really. And I've got a firm focus on developing leaders and teams, because I actually believe that if you get teams and leaders in organizations working well together and aligned well, then ultimately you're going to have very resilient and highly effective organizations. Doesn't always work that way, but I believe that a key aspect around having successful organizations is to have highly competent and very effective teams. And the greater and more impactful results that we know come through people and teams working well together. So I think in many ways that's why I really was very interested in getting into this industry in the first place. I write ebooks, I write columns for the media, I speak at about 20 conferences a year, both in Australia and internationally. So very sort of motivated about my work and what I do. Just a couple of pictures of me working in Africa and in Fiji and some of the community sector. All people whom I love dearly, all people who've taught me so much in life. And really, when I talk about bad bosses and difficult people to get on well with at work, all of these people kind of, doesn't matter really what race, color, creed, or which continent you work on, we all have people who are bad bosses, difficult bosses. And ultimately what we know from a lot of the research is that when you have difficult or bad bosses, the sad part about that is that not only do organizations become less effective, less productive, and less profitable, but their best people walk out the door. And what the real sadness is that so many great organizations have lost fantastic people because of bad leadership or bosses who are inept, incapable, lacking in empathy, etc., etc. You should be able to see the screen. So can everybody tell me, there's a lot of you on the line. I'm just getting a question from Alan. Should I be able to see the pics? Can you all see the pics, ladies, gentlemen? Somebody tell me, is it just Alan's computer, or is there a more broader problem around seeing the screen at the moment? I'm presuming, because nobody's responding to me, that you can see the pics. So Alan, what you should be able to see is you should be able to see the PowerPoint that I'm showing everybody. And if you're not seeing the PowerPoint, then I'm presuming, because nobody's told me that they can't see the screen, then the issue might be with your computer. But at the end of the day, you should be able to see the screen, and I think that from my perspective, it says to me that the screen is showing. I can see the printing, but no movies. No, I can't see the PowerPoint. Okay, so you won't be seeing any movies or videos. I'm actually just showing you a PowerPoint, Alan. So if I just leave Alan aside there, could somebody else just tell me, please, can you see the screen? I'm just concerned, is it Alan alone? Okay, so Alan, I've got other people. Thanks, Caroline. Caroline says she can see the profile picture slide with the who I am points. Okay, so I'm one slide ahead of you. Sometimes it's a delay if you're in a different country. And I'm not sure why some of you can only see the first slide. But let me keep going. I'm just wondering what is actually going on. Let me just keep going and seeing if there's something else that actually happens with this as I move forward. And I guess part of the issue I'm asking you that is because I'm doing absolutely nothing differently to the way that I do it every time that I run a PowerPoint. So if I go down there, all right, so here's a picture of a cat upside down. There's a picture of a cat upside down on the screen, which you should be able to see right now. And what I talk about with this picture is, you know, sometimes you might feel as if your life is upside down. But if you can see that, can you all see a cat that's upside down on the screen? Okay, just hold on a sec, people. I'm just going to see what's going on. Give me a minute. Can't see cat. Okay, hold on a tick. Vic, is MJ there? Hi, darling. All right, don't worry. Thanks, hon. Yeah, no, don't worry. It's fine. Don't worry. All right, so what I'm going to do, okay, so what we're going to do, because this is a great old thing of technology, can you actually hear me, ladies and gentlemen? If you can't see the screen, and we're not going to allow that to become a problem for us, can you actually hear me? So if I talk to you about what's on the screen, can you actually hear me? So what I'm thinking that I will do is we don't let technology become a problem for us. What I will do is I will just keep moving and talking. Okay, no problems with the audio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep talking even though you can't see the pictures, which is really annoying, but let's not let that get us in the way of a good webinar. So grab some pens, grab a paper, and I'm going to talk through what I think is important for you to actually be able to have a look at or to listen to what I'm saying tonight. Okay, so what I'm going to say is essentially there are so many people in organizations who are difficult to work with, who are belligerent at times, who really in many ways, if you think about it, make the workplace a really difficult place to go. And I think one of the most important things about that is when that person is your boss or that person is the chairman of the board. Because one of the difficulties with those people is they have the power very often over which nobody else does. So it makes their bullying behavior, if you like, or their bad behavior even more difficult to deal with because of the what we call positional power that they have. So take down some notes as I go. It is a pity that you can't see the screen, but really not a train smash. And I think one of the key things we get so tired of is trying to work out what to do with this. You know, what do we actually do with people who are difficult at work, who really aren't collaborative? And I mean, I think there would be very many examples of all of you sitting in this chat room who would be able to say, oh, Karen had the absolutely worst, you know, experience with somebody, the worst experience with a particular boss. And so I guess what I want you to think about is what is the worst experience you have had? What is it that has been really difficult for you? And why is it that you think that that's the case? You know, what is it that's been going on for you that you think, oh, I just can't bear working with this person? So if you could just give me some understanding of what that is, that would be fantastic. Alan says that the cat's just turned up. The cat picture is really about, you know, do you ever wake up in the morning not quite sure whether you're this way up or that way up, or, you know, do you wake up with a bad hair day? And I think very often when you want to get very involved in your work and love what you do, it's really difficult to be able to do that, particularly if you're just in a situation where the boss that you're trying to work well with just doesn't play ball. It's just being very, very difficult. So that's what I think we need to talk about tonight. And when we talk about that, I think one of the key things to just understand is that a bad boss makes all the difference. You know, just as much as, if you like, a good boss makes all the difference. And I think this is a really important point that I want to say, ladies and gentlemen, that I want you to write down, and I'll go slowly here. You know, you can throw all the money, all the prestige, all the opportunity, all the rewards at your people to increase their engagement and their motivation. But nothing will make a difference to any of your people if they are stuck under a lousy boss. What you will have is people who are just consistently miserable. Certainly the rewards and the promotions and the money might help, but ultimately if you've got a male or a female boss who is deliberately bullying or deliberately antagonistic or even deliberately passive aggressive, I can promise you that over 25 years of doing this work, I'll tell you what I can predict for you, is that they will be running out the door. So a lousy boss is something that can ruin an organization. As I say, it could be a great organization, but you've got leaders that are really, belligerent, difficult to deal with, and not supportive of their people, and they will be on the internet looking for other places to go. And somebody's just asked me, the thing I find most difficult is not knowing how the boss is going to react in any situation. And it's the most difficult thing, because what you then have is that those bosses are what we call obviously unpredictable. I was reading something the other day about, and I'm not suggesting, please don't misunderstand that this is your boss in any way, but I was reading something about a borderline personality disorder. And it was about a woman who goes to work all the time, and she's in a leadership role, so she's probably middle management. But the article was about she as a leader, and the author of the article was talking about how, for example, they'll go into work any day and they'll never know what the boss is going to do. So will she come in and greet them? Will she ignore them? Will she be able to say a good morning, or will she just ignore them? And it's the little things. I think that's the really key thing, that when we talk about a bad boss makes all the difference, or a good boss makes all the difference, it's like, I really believe that most of leadership is around the concept of relationships. So whilst all leaders, and particularly the higher up in an organization you go, the better at it you need to be, and whilst all organizational leaders need to focus on getting the job done, i.e. completing the tasks, in my experience over so many years, it's those leaders who are able to have fantastic relationships with their people. Those are the leaders who their team members or their people will follow to the ends of the earth. But when you've got a boss that's unpredictable, hard to read, difficult to assess, what you find is over time they are not trustworthy. And ultimately, if you cannot trust your boss, then what it means is that you're not in a position to be able to be completely open. You can't be in a position where you know that boss will, support you in another forum, or they will defend you in another example with somebody in the organization who might be critical of you. And it sounds crazy, but those are the little things that become the big, big things. And so we're going to talk about these people tonight, because whilst they are, and the interesting thing is that it's a bit cheeky, but I'll say it, I often refer to them as the organizational psychopath. They're great to the boss's face, the big, big boss, but to the people on their level or down the line, they're absolutely terrible. And of course, it becomes a lot more difficult if the person who I call the organizational psychopath, get this, right, is the big, big boss. Because then it's like, well, fair enough, but what do I do with this, and where do I go? So we talk a little bit about, people lose motivation and interest, and profitability walks out the door. And I think that it'll be fair to say, if you think about ongoing workplace difficulties, bullying, harassment, sick leave, depression, all those kind of things that people often get from working in toxic or dysfunctional working environments. The reality, I guess, at the end of the day is that people essentially don't get paid enough to put up with behavior that is unpredictable, nasty and toxic. They just don't. And I think the other thing is that, what I guess we all really believe is that life is just too short, and you shouldn't have to put up with other people's bad behavior, really. And I'm really, really strong on this point. And there are some leaders that I've worked with over the time who think that the higher up in the organization they go, the more entitled they are to behave badly. Wrong. A recent study conducted in the States found that almost 80% of employees surveyed, you're going to listen to this, almost 80% of employees surveys identified their boss as a lousy manager. And 70% of people in that study stated that their immediate superior had no clue as to how to be a good manager or lead people effectively. So I think that that's a really important thing when you think about, there was another research done by a guy called Harvey Hornstein, who estimated that 90% of the US workforce has been subjected to abusive behavior by a bad boss at some time. And this was based on conclusions on a survey of nearly 1,000 workers over 8 years. So, you know, when you think about why are there so many bad bosses out there? And I think it's a whole range of different reasons, which we'll talk about as we go through the presentation. The fact is that at the end of the day, forget about the, workers' compensation, forget about the, taking a mental health day. The fact is that the time may come where you need to walk away from the role in organization in search for greater peace and ultimately sanity, because what we do know, and as I'm sure you have every understanding of, is that stress kills. Stress kills. And if you're constantly being bombarded with negative vibes and bad feelings from the boss, particularly if they're high up in the organization, one of the key resolutions to that is to work out, is this really worth it? And if it's not worth it, then you know what I say, cut your losses, find something that you're happy with a much more supportive and effective manager, and become in a situation where you just think to yourself, I'm happy. You might not even earn as much, ladies and gentlemen, but you know what? At least you can put your hand over your heart and say, well, I love what I do. So I've decided to share with you 6 bad boss types. So again, here's your pen and paper. Write down what you think your boss is, right? It seems to me as if most of you have caught up with the slides. So I think, as Caroline says, it probably was just an internet delay, so I apologize for that. Okay, so here we go. The 6 bad boss types. All of them can drive you crazy. All of them can ruin your career at that particular organization. And none of them, and I reiterate, none of them are worth it. So, the always angry boss. You know, this is the boss who walks around unpleasant. So they're often unpredictable. Oh, the interesting thing is that even though they can be calm one moment and explode the next, it's always as if working with him feels like walking around on eggshells. Like, you know, they have this constant zone of anger, and the anger changes levels, I guess. But overall, they are angry and not very nice people. But what's interesting, with my psychologist's hat on, I'm going to say something here. I often think that the always angry boss is somebody who's deeply unhappy. Now, in understanding this, and you might have the always angry boss, I'm certainly not asking you to become their counselor, their psychologist, because at the end of the day, in leadership roles, people need to be able to manage their emotions and, you know, make sure that their emotions are working for them and their team and not against them and their team, aka emotional intelligence. But I think if you consider life overall, people who are always angry are deeply unhappy people. You know, you must be able to think about people, you know, it could be a friend or a neighbor, but generally, you know, people who are cranky and belligerent and, you know, sour-faced all the time, they can't be happy, surely. This is a lovely one, the completely clueless boss. So, and there's one thing to be completely clueless, right? But there's another thing as a boss who is completely clueless, who believe that they're completely cluey and everybody around them is completely clueless. I used to work with a man like this, and he was really interesting. He was completely clueless, but he was quite lovable in being clueless, because he would say, oh, look, I'm absolutely clueless. My team are the guys and girls who get the results. And he was so spot on. But he did it in a way that was really quite, I suppose he was quite affectionate in a way, and he was quite sweet. But one of the dangers of having a completely clueless boss is that they can be so clueless, ladies and gentlemen, that they think they're cluey. In other words, they've got no idea at all, but more so, or worse still, they think that they know it all. And I think those are quite dangerous people, because they're so adamant in their own fragile egos that they're doing a great job and they don't know it all, that they often walk all over those people under them, don't listen to them, don't pay attention to their opinions, because why should I? Because I know it all. So whilst the completely clueless boss might sound like, oh, well, we can live with them, they can be quite dangerous in their lack of competence and their overwhelming ignorance. The ever critical boss. here you go. It really doesn't matter what you do, when you do, how you do, why you do. But this particular boss is critical of you all the time, your team members. You know, the report was okay, but you could have added another 2 paragraphs. Look, I think you did quite well in the meeting yesterday, but I think you should have stood up for yourself. In the performance review, look, I think overall you've done okay this year, lots of areas for improvement. Look, I think overall, you know, you've come away, and I think that it's good to have you in the team, but there's a lot of areas I think that you need to improve upon. So the ever-critical boss is somebody who just never sees the light for you or for the team. And, you know, if you think about our lives as children, and I won't bore you with the Freuds and the, you know, Jungs of the world, but if you think about when we are as children, all we really ever want to do is feel as if we are validated and that we are appreciated by others and that we are supported by others. When you're working for the ever-critical boss, I often find that when I'm speaking to people, working with people like this, it's no matter what you or the team does, nothing is good enough for this boss. Your work is never good enough. Your team does not perform well enough. The boss is the only person who does a good job in his or her mind. What's more important, I think, with this boss is not so much around the fact that the tasks that you do aren't good, but I often find that these are bosses who are soul-destroying. They hurt your soul over time because they see nothing light about you or your team, and they become awful people to work with and under. This is a lovely one. I'm not nice to your face and talk about you behind your back, boss. I used to work with this man, and he was so happy and jovial, and what a nice man, ostensibly, to everybody's face. But he used to talk about us in boardrooms meetings because he was in the executive, and he would talk about us as being incompetent. We were stupid, we were morons, we didn't know anything. Mind you, most of us were better tertiary educated than he was. Not that that's everything, and I reiterate, not that it is. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's got to stand up for something. And I think the most difficult part about this man was not that he was critical about his people. I don't like that as a leader, because I think that if you've got something to say about your team or your people who work for you, you need to have those calm discussions behind closed doors, that he would decry his people publicly. And I think this is an important thing, right? If you've got a boss who criticizes their people to all and sundry, what does it say about the boss? And I think, you know, Margaret, you make a good point. I'm not nice to your face and talk about you behind your back, boss. This is also one of the bosses that you don't quite know what's going to happen, because they're nice to your face, but they're not nice behind your back. So the result is an ongoing sense of fear, an ongoing sense of trepidation. And I can tell you something, that most of the people who work with this person are already going for interviews at your competitive organizations. The totally disorganized boss. So this is the boss who forgets appointments or arrives late or loses things, hasn't got the board papers, can't find the report that they did, doesn't know where their car keys are. Generally, they don't tend to go too far in an organization, but there are certainly occasions that I can think about where they have. But the totally disorganized boss can be very frustrating for the team, always late, can't find things, blames others when things go wrong often, or goals are not achieved because they're not organized. And in many ways, I have people say to me, Karen, this boss is a nightmare. Often they don't achieve their targets and they blame their people for being underperformers. Well, if you think about the concept of leadership, leadership is to lead. And it is not possible to lead a highly performing team, ladies and gentlemen, over time if you are a disorganized leader. You know, what they say is disorganized leader, disorganized team. And they generally don't get, these people generally don't get to top of organizations. Probably my worst, the smiling assassin. They not only are people who will be derogatory behind your back, they often are derogatory to your face. You know, the sort of henchmen, they'll arrive and they'll still smile whilst they're firing you. They'll still smile whilst they're telling your team member that they're the worst employee they've ever had. And you know, you sort of look at these people and think, how can you be smiling at me or somebody with this sort of glint of happiness in your eye when you're actually executing us at the same time? Really, really, I'm often asked, Karen, are they passive aggressive? No, they're not. They're brutal. They're actually aggressive, but they do it in a way that I think on some level feeds their ego, makes them feel important about themselves. But you know, the interesting thing about this, and I think it's a really important point, is that the best leaders in the world, I did a webinar not that long ago. I talk a lot about servant leadership, and that's something I want you all to go and do. Take your pen, take your paper, and write down servant leadership, and go and have a look at servant leadership, because servant leadership and transformational leadership are two styles of leadership today, and they are really the only styles in terms of being passionate, being charismatic. People will follow them to the ends of the earth, those kind of people. The smiling assassin, you know, he's only as strong as his next execution, and they're dangerous. And if you've got a boss, when I'm talking about the head honcho who's running an organization like that, I can tell you something, run for the hills, because it's a dangerous place to be. So here's the thing, right? You've got 6 bad boss types. Tell me, anybody would you like to share an experience of one of those that I've given you, the 6 bad boss types, that you've got a boss like this? And maybe just type, what's the experience for you? I won't mention who you are, but I could actually then just talk a little bit about your experience with the other members on the webinar, so we can all learn from this, right? Because that's what the webinar is about. So have any of you, which is the worst one that you've had? So let me ask, okay, Alan, I'll ask you, tell me which is the worst boss you've had, and can you explain why you say they were the worst boss you've had? Now, it might take you a little while to type that out for me, so I'll keep going. But if you do decide to write a response to what I've just asked any of you, actually, then I'll stop and I'll just, you know, play with that idea a little bit longer. So there they are, and they're difficult people to deal with. They are manipulative many of the times. They're not honest to your face a lot of the time, and they talk about you. They are unpredictable. And you never ever know. Moody. Oh my gosh, I should have added always the moody boss. The moody boss is probably one of my worst. I think that's what you're really saying, Margaret, is you're not knowing how the boss is going to react in any situation. They're moody, you know, not really knowing what they're going to come like at any one moment, what their response is or their reaction is. It's a very difficult place to work with somebody like this. And you know, the most amazing thing I often think is, how on earth did these people get into leadership positions? And the worst is that a lot of these people are at the top of organizations, and I shake my head thinking, how on earth did you get there? You might have been technically good, fair enough, but you know, when it comes to leading people and passion and, you know, verve and really being charismatic, how on earth did you get to the top of the organization? So when we talk about a bag, here we go. I've got a couple of you writing feverishly now. So this is from Caroline. We just had a boss that fit all of these categories on any given day, depending upon your position within the organization and what the boss wanted. I mean, how scary is that? You know, if you've got a boss like that, it's like, and I think this is an important point, ladies and gentlemen, everybody in the organization walks around on tippy toes, on eggshells waiting to burst. And of course, when you're working in a culture of fear and power like that, people are not relaxed. And if people are not relaxed, generally people are not productive. You know, we do our best when we feel secure, when we feel safe, when we feel as if we can trust those people around us. And when you've got somebody who's all of those things, in many ways over time, the organizational culture becomes too risky to live in, really, or to work in. And you might stay there for a little while, but in the long term, you won't stay there for a long period of time. Yeah, thank you for responding. Alan says he used to say RHIP, rank has its privileges. He used to keep things secretive. Knowledge is power. Well, isn't that interesting? You know, what sort of a response is that from a boss? The best boss, ladies and gentlemen, is the boss that gives power to their people, so they don't swank into a team meeting, you know, all full of pomp and ceremony and about how important they are. They don't pull rank because they don't need to pull rank. Everybody knows that they're the boss. Everybody respects them for being the boss. Not mates with their team. I think that's an important point, that they, you know, they socialize with their team very once in a while and they support their team, but they're not big mates with their team. And there's been so many situations over the years where I've seen a boss who'll go out with, you know, the annual dreaded Christmas party where the boss and the staff start having far too many beers, and then you've kind of got, forget about rank, have its privileges, Alan, everything just kind of goes downhill. But when you've got bosses, you can see sometimes bosses need to keep things behind closed doors because that's the, you know, the position that they're in. But when you've got egocentric bosses, bosses driven by power and control, those are people who really they don't disagree with this, but they suffer from, and this is something I want you to write down, they suffer from an innate sense of inadequacy. They're little people in their own hearts. You know, they're not strong. They're not resilient in their own world. Because if they were, they don't need to be powerful with all the pomp and ceremony. And here we've got another one. The disorganized boss was an intelligent person, as they often are, Kim, but had no systems and always cancelled meetings and made it very difficult to implement any change. Well, how do you do that? So, for example, you as team members might say, we've got great ideas and we've got things we're going to do, and the boss might say, fantastic, well, I'll write a system or a program or a policy. And the worst I find is the stop-start boss. So we start something, we never finish it, and then we start something else, we never finish that either. And what's really interesting in what you're saying, Kim, is if you have a boss who's got no systems, policies, procedures, or policy or ways of doing things, you can again come back to the slide I said earlier. You can have the best team, you can have the most gifted, intelligent, you know, determined people on that team, but because you haven't got the systems, the policies, and the process to support you, I promise you something, ladies and gentlemen, $1,000 you will fall over, number one, because there's nothing, it's like the house has no foundation on which to be built. But more importantly, your people who are intelligent are people who are going to leave. And ultimately, they're going to go to somewhere where the processes and policies are there, and they know people like security, they like certainty. They don't have the policy, systems, and procedures, there's no certainty. And I think this is another one. Alan says it can work both ways. I've got a senior staff member who's the smiling assassin. Very dangerous, causes problems by creating distrust, etc. And I think that's a really important point that you make, Alan. But here's the thing, and I think this is another thing I want you to write down for all of you. If you have a bad team member, so instead of the bad boss in any of those six, let's just pretend that you had the bad team member, right? Or the bad senior team member. It is a leadership issue, ladies and gentlemen. And if you, for example, are leading that team, let's just assume, and I don't know if you are, but if you are, then the issue lies with you. And I know some people go, oh, really? Yeah, because here's the thing, if people down the line are allowed to be smiling assassins or allowed to be badly behaved, stay with me on the theory, are allowed to be badly behaved, then you're going to get more of it. So if you've got little Johnny, 5 years of age, and his mommy says, little Johnny, don't swear. And little Johnny pulls his tongue out and says, well, okay, mommy, I won't, but continues. And then mommy doesn't do anything about that. Well, what's your bottom dollar? Well, little Johnny will continue to swear. So the point I make with that, Alan, is that you're absolutely right. But if you've got team members who misbehave or are badly behaved, as in any of these six, then it's because their behavior is tolerated, and I must even add, certainly maybe not in your organization, but in others, even condoned. So think about this. You might say, well, not really, but I want you to push a little bit further into that, particularly if the team member or the team falls under you. So part of these webinars are about thinking about what we can do differently, what we can do better. And I think very often leaders up the line don't know how to deal with difficult people. They don't know how to deal with badly behaving team members. They do try, they'll give it a bit of a stab, but they're not tough enough. And when I'm talking about tough enough, I'm not talking about rude tough. I'm talking about assertive and fair tough. And that's a whole nother discussion, but it's about making your expectations clear what you will and will not tolerate in your organization. And if you've got somebody under you who's a smiling assassin, my question to you is, what are you going to do about that? So Margaret says, ever critical, my team has met all performance targets. It's criticized for responding to requests for feedback on HR policies, seen as troublemakers for asking questions and for not wanting to give up leave that has been booked when asked to work at the last minute. Well, with respect, and I think you make a really good point, your staff members have every reason to ask questions. If there are HR policies or, operational systems that they want some information about, why shouldn't they be able to ask? I mean, those aren't things that are secretive. They're not attached to anybody. They're there to, make running the organization and employing people more effective and more efficient. So what is the ego behind this manager? What is this leader scared of? Being exposed, losing control, and if you're seen as troublemakers for asking questions, well, what sort of an organization is this? Dictatorial? So in other words, I can tell you what you want to hear, but don't question my authority. And so really I come back to a sense of power and control and a frugal mindset of a manager like this. And for not wanting to give up leave that's been booked, I think is just, look, I think that what I really believe in, that sometimes that might happen, ladies and gentlemen, once in a while. Life is such that things happen. But if you've got somebody, a staff member who's really, has put in their leave for a long time and they've got a cruise organized, or they just want to stay at home with the kids or the grandkids or just recharge their batteries, and they're then criticized for that, you've got a really ineffective leader who has no understanding as to how to motivate or stand for or defend or be supportive of their people. And again, I say, Margaret, I wonder how these people get into positions of leadership. Because in all the years I've been doing this, really, I think that depending on the sector, there's some sectors that have, I think, more competent leaders than others, but some sectors have absolutely leaders that I think, how on earth did you get there? And, leadership, being a good boss, is just as hard work in many ways as being a bad boss. I think to be a bad boss takes energy. I really do. And I think often, what do those people wake up like 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about? Do you think they're happy when they stomp on people or they're rude to people? Do you think that they wake up and think, oh, I'm such a great guy or gal because I do this so well, and my people, even though my people hate me, I feel good about myself? I think that people who are like this intentionally are people who really have deeper issues than just not understanding leadership capacity, if you get what I'm saying. So the bad boss checklist, they never greet their people. So you might think, well, I don't know if they're a bad boss. Well, let's just have a look at this and see if any of your bosses or the people we're talking about sit in here. They get angry quickly. They often shout or they scream or they actually ignore. That's another one. There you go, Margaret, unpredictable, one moment calm, the next fiery. I found them very difficult to deal with, from 0 to 600,000 kilometers in 1 microsecond. Those people, because of their level of unpredictability, you will have a high staff turnover, bet my bottom dollar. They get their people to do what they're not prepared to do themselves. I always say, if you want to be a great leader, get down, roll up the sleeves, get down there and wash the toilets and clean the floors and do what your people are doing, because there's nothing that people love more than to see their bosses in the thick of it with them when necessary, or even if not necessary, just as part of the job, because they feel then the boss gets them, that there's this camaraderie, this understanding. They criticize their people publicly. I shudder when I put this slide together. I shudder. I was coaching a boss about 3 weeks ago, and we were in a team meeting, and this boss just screamed at one of his team members. And it was quite bizarre, because this is a man who just started to coach. And I just said to him after, I said, if I ever see you do that again, I will not coach you anymore. And he said, well, what did I do? I said, well, you just criticized him publicly. Well, he acts like an idiot and he shouldn't have done that. Well, it's just inexcusable and unacceptable. If you are upset with people, you at least handle your emotions intelligently, i.e. emotional intelligence, i.e. leadership. And what you then do is that you call them aside and you stay calm and you have the discussion. But you never, ever ever criticize your people publicly. They talk about their people to other managers or staff. I've made my point about that earlier. Disloyalty, I'll tell you what, get a disloyal boss or a disloyal team member, and the staff again will be on the internet looking for other more attractive opportunities. They growl a lot. Oh, oh, oh. I call them the barkers of society. Oh, oh, oh. You know, well, how are you today? Oh. So what would you like me to do with the report? Oh. Is there anything else you need from me? Oh, oh. And they're just really, really unresponsive, and they're not particularly nice to work with or for. And another one I find very, very difficult, they don't play fair, different rules for different people. So job for the boys or job for the girls, and, you know, Samantha can get, you know, another 20 minutes of lunch, but Johnny and you know, Nerida can't because they've got to work harder. Once you start having these kind of different rules for different people, and essentially what it is favoritism, you're going to lose good people. And it's just really, really ineffective. Ellen says, I'm aware of the essay and how she does it, but if I say anything, I may be labeled a bully. I like to use a participative model, and I'm very cautious of not being a bad boss, but do my best to appease them. Perhaps I need to be autocratic. I don't think it's about being autocratic, Alan. I just want to address something. Ladies and gentlemen, there are some of you on this line who are CEOs, and there's 2 of you, I think, who are chairman of the board. One of the things in organizations these days is that people at higher levels don't want to take on people down the line necessarily for fear of being bullied. I think it's very, very important that I make the distinction here, which is this. There's a very, very fine line, one might argue, between bullying and performance management. And I think it's not, and I think this is an important point for you to write down, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. So if you are being assertive, if you are in some ways validating them for some of the things that they may do well, but you're taking them on areas that you think need to be performed better, and you can attach that to outcomes of the role, that is performance management. And I think you need to be, you know, fine and courageous and strong, and I need to manage my people, that's my job, and their performance, and this is what I'll do. Bullying is more around that ongoing, you know, relentless, covert or overt, although less overt these days because of legislation, litigation. But bullying is more about ongoing, relentless. And I think if you can make a distinction between the two, and you do it in a way that's very assertive and not passive or aggressive, then you're managing performance. You are not being a bully. So I think, Alan, there's also a fine line between appeasing and taking people on with regards to ineffective performance. Because if you allow people, or you appease too many people when they're not performing, then here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, you perpetuate the problem. So I think it's a very important point that you make the distinction between what it is, and is it what they're doing attached to the outcomes of their role? And if it is, then go in for the performance management discussion, but be calm and assertive and not frustrated, and, you know, be dictatorial with them at the same time. But don't be fearful of being accused of being a bully if you can attach it, as I say, in a polite way to role outcomes. So if you've got any of these, then you've probably got a boss who you struggle with. So what to do as an organization? I think that I'm going to talk about the organization, and I'm going to talk about as an individual. So many organizations I go to, and I think probably more so in the not-for-profit or community-based organizations, I think that we've got a long way to go in this. I don't think that we're nearly, you know, where we need to be, and I think that a lot of poor performance at all levels is more tolerated than maybe there would be in corporate organizations. Now, when I make that comment, ladies and gentlemen, I'm making the comment because I'm working across all sectors. I work in government, education. I've explained I work internationally. I work in hotels. You know, I work in corporate. I work everywhere. And so because I'm able to work everywhere, I'm able to see the distinction between which are better at what. And so that's why I make the comment that I think we need to do better around this as an organization, largely at this stage probably in the community sector. However, don't be seduced into thinking that it's not just the community sector. It's not. It goes across all areas and all sectors. So number one is make sure you have a zero tolerance anti-bullying policy. And when I say make sure you have a zero tolerance anti-bullying policy, it's not just a certificate on the wall, because that is useless. If you are going to have a zero tolerance, then everybody needs to know what that is. Here's the thing, right? Including the people at the top. Everybody needs to be educated in what that looks like, because a lot of people have a total misunderstanding of what bullying and harassment is. So as long as we've all been educated about what it is, the other thing that you do in that you actually outline the expectations then of how you expect people to behave. The other thing, for example, which is a little bit cheeky, but if you've got a CEO who, the board has introduced with the staff a zero tolerance policy, and the CEO is, or people up the line are not behaving in a way that is non-bullying, i.e. they're bullying or badly behaved, then in many ways that policy is a defense mechanism for doing something about it. Now you might say, well, who would I go to, because he's the boss of the organization? And I'm not suggesting in any way it's easy, because it's not. However, what it does mean is that sometimes the board does get involved, and I have seen this happen, and actually remove a CEO because of this zero tolerance policy. Listen to your people. Very often what I found in organizations, particularly the higher up you go, the less involved you are with people down the line, for all the right reasons. But I always say that the best leaders are the leaders who know what's going on down the line in their organization. You might not spend a lot of time down there, but you're going to go and have you might go and have a coffee with Johnny, who's a rep on the road, or you might go and have a cup of tea with Samantha, who's cleaning the floors in your organization. And I think those leaders are the ones who are most in tune with what goes on down the organization, and they listen to their people well, because sadly what we know from a lot of the research is that very often the higher up people go in an organization, the more they get fed information that the people below want them to hear. And so when I go into organizations, often what I do is I actually get them, the CEOs, if I'm working at that level, or the senior managers, I organize for them to actually go and spend time down the line, actually just hanging out with the people down the line, so that they get a much better understanding of what goes on down there, because that's really how you learn to listen to your people. If you have bad bosses as managers, or bad boss managers, sorry, under you, so you've got a range of managers who work under you, you either get them to shape up or ship them out. I was speaking at a conference about this the other day, and I reiterate, I think that far too many organizations are tolerant of poor behavior. And if you remember role modeling, if you're going to have badly behaved leaders, why would you expect to have highly performing and exemplary behaved teams? Don't, because you're setting yourself up for failure. And when I am doing a lot of coaching, I'll say to CEOs, or sometimes even board members, so they've got a problem with, let's say, one of the people, one of the leaders, and I ask, why do you tolerate that? Oh, well, they're on a performance plan, and, Karen, we're trying to get them to behave differently. And then I can go back another 6, 8, 10, 12 months later, and they're still there, still behaving badly. Oh, and I say to whoever it is I'm working with, why is that person still in that role? Oh, well, they're trying, or we're trying, or truth is that we haven't done anything about being serious about resolving the issue with this boss. So here's the thing, cheeky as it is, I say this, absolutely performance manage the bad behavior. Certainly give them the opportunity to improve. I think we all need to have it in life. But here's the thing, right? You only try so much, and then you get rid of them, ladies and gentlemen. And I do know some of you are going to say, oh, well, Karen, not that easy. Oh, yes, I get that it's not that easy. But that's why organizations have policies. Your written warnings. And if you don't perform, then this. But so many organizations get to warning number 1, and then nothing goes ahead. Well, here's the comment. If you have performance appraisal processes that you're using, my question is, well, why have them in the first place? Ongoing performance reviews down the line. I was working with somebody the other day. We've just been called into a new organization, large organization. This person at a senior level has not had a performance appraisal. You ready for this, ladies and gentlemen? For 13 years, 13 years. And I just go, right. So why not? Oh, I don't know. His boss was too busy, and The other thing is that his boss thinks he knows the job well, so he doesn't really need a performance review. The thing about that is that, you know, organizations change, our customers change, demands of our organizations change. And unless we're up with the change, as we all know, you know, we might not be as efficient or as productive as our competitors. And if you don't manage somebody in terms of having a performance review for 13 years, A, how will they know that they're doing well? B, how will they know areas for improvement? And C, they often get complacent in their role. And most importantly, D, in comes the opposition and takes your customers. So performance reviews need to be a regular part of featuring in terms of your leadership. And policies and procedures are clear. Oh my gosh, how many times do I go into organizations and I can say, you know, do you have an HR policy? Oh, I think they're not sure. Or, so what's the HR department doing about this? Oh, well, I let them know about 2 years ago that we've got a problem. 2 years ago? Yep, we're still working on it. 2 years ago is inexcusable. It is not okay. And people need to be held accountable for these things. You know, policies are there for a reason, procedures are there for a reason. And if people aren't using them, my question to you, if you're a leader, is why? And if you've got things that just go round and round in circles and this problem hasn't been resolved or that bad boss hasn't been, you know, hauled over the coals, my question is, why? So here I have another lovely person saying, I have moved people on who were given many chances and it is liberating. Once they're gone, it is interesting how many of the other staff start smiling again. And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Like, and the question then is, why did you tolerate that for so long? Is it that you felt sorry for them? Is it that you didn't want to upset them? And this is the important thing, is that when you move the non-performers or the poor performers or the badly behaved out, the other children in the team start feeling as if, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I guess one of the questions or one of the comments I make about that is this, that if you don't do it for any other reason, then do it for the other team members who are getting suffocated under this bad behavior. And also, you're not seen in the true light of the leader that you need to be seen in if you're not dealing with this behavior. You become the too soft leader. And we might as well go elsewhere, because our real leader, who we like, i.e. you, is tough enough. And the problem with that is that you lose good people. And I think the other thing that's really important that I want to make this comment is that people respect tough managers who do it in the right way. You know, who are not condescending, who are not critical. Your people will respect you more if you do not tolerate bad behaviors. So what to do as an individual? Meet your goals and perform your role well. Why I put this in here is because you don't want to give a bad boss any opportunity to further insult, upset, or decry what you do. So if it's possible to meet your goal and perform your role well, then do everything you can. The issue around this very often is that it's very difficult for people to perform well when they are being led by a bad boss. You know, stress, absenteeism. I've seen people develop anxiety, mental health issues, depression, and a lot of it comes down to leadership, a bad boss. And the other thing which we need to think very carefully about, ladies and gentlemen, and there's a lot of you online here tonight from a lot of different organizations, is this, is that if you allow people to treat people badly, what you then often get is the good old workers' compensation, or the organization gets sued. And if you at the top of the organization are seen to have done nothing about helping this person who is being bullied resolve the issue or protect them, here's a scary thought, you're often liable. So that's another reason why that you've got to actually start dealing with bad bosses if they fall under your role. Profession at all times, even as I said just now, hard to say, but I think it's about not to come down to the level if they're screaming and shouting at you, do not scream and shout at them. You act, you know, professionally at all times, and you manage your emotions well, and you solace elsewhere. So an example might be to find a positive mentor in the organization who can be there to help you. Very often, the difficulty with this is that if you go above a bad boss, it leaves you exposed. But I guess the other side of the coin is that if you don't go and seek help in an organization, well, you're going nowhere anyway. So I always think that depending on the situation, I gently try and encourage people to go and speak to another person in the organization, but not, and I think this is an important point, not in the operational line. So often try and go outside of the line. Another thing, depending on whether you feel strong enough, but I always say approach the boss calmly, be assertive, explain the impact of their behavior on you and that you would like to resolve the issues. And I do appreciate that that comment really is a big statement, particularly if you're being, with a boss who's a bullying boss and is a critical boss. It's very difficult to explain that sort of thing, but it's all about being assertive. And, when you speak to me like that in front of the rest of the team, I feel really undervalued and I would like you to stop it, please. That's an assertive technique, right? And when the boss says, well, as far as I'm concerned, you're underperforming and, you're not doing your job, that's when you say, I'm sorry you feel that, well, perhaps we could talk about this. And I'll notice I'll slip into the assertive technique. But when you speak to me like that in front of the other members of the team, I feel really upset about it. So if we do have some issues to resolve, I'm happy to do it. What I'm asking you to do is please not speak to me like that in front of the rest of my team. So you stand up to the bully. Of course, the danger you have is that the bully will get worse. But generally what we know from research done essentially in kindergarten and schoolyards is that if you stand up to a bully, often they leave you alone because on some sick, macabre level, they actually respect the fact that you stood up to them. Very, very sad, very strange. I always say keep a journal of the incidents. You never know what's going to happen. You never know where their bad behavior is going to take you or take them, and I just say it's always a good idea to keep some record of what the situation is and where you find yourself, because if you don't, you might not have a leg to stand on further down the track. Keep abreast of other openings within the organization and outside of it, particularly if you can see that the bad boss isn't going to go, or more importantly, the bad boss is best mates with the big boss, and because you've got this little, relationship happening above you, it's very difficult for you to, in the operational line, stay there. And it might be, again, what I was saying earlier when I started tonight, is that if this behavior continues, it's not worth it, ladies and gentlemen. You're better off finding happiness elsewhere. You know why? Because life is so short. And, we never know when it's not going to care anymore, and no boss is worth any amount of stress or depression or anxiety or being miserable because they've got a frail or, a failing ego and they feel inadequate within their own shoes. Network. I just say network with other people, network with other organizations, because you know what it's like. The more you put yourself out there, the more you're out there, the more visible you are, the more opportunities come out. And if you're not networking, if you're not visible, how will people ever know? How will people ever know where you are or that you're available? So out and about and network. Don't go and talk to your boss's boss, certainly unless it's the last resort. I put that in now. I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. Because there have been many instances in my career where I have actually advised this, and it's actually worked out really, really well. Sometimes the boss's boss didn't realize what was going on. I always have to ask the question, why? Why did that boss's boss not know? Because if you're a really effective, productive leader, you should know what goes down under you. And if you don't, my question is why? But if you have tried everything else and nothing's worked, even spoken to the industrial relations person, some people go to the union delegate or their HR manager, and if that doesn't work, well, what else have you got? You've got nothing to lose. Maybe going to the boss's boss is a good thing, but of course if the boss and the boss's boss are best mates, well then that becomes, maybe one last exit interview strategy that you're going to use to have your final swan song. No fun with a bad boss, that's for sure. You spend so much time at work, you may as well enjoy it. Bad bosses affect your sanity, your happiness, and ultimately, you know what? Your life. You don't get paid enough money to take their bad behavior. If the bad boss is a person in big charge, i.e. the big boss, I say get out. You're worth far more than a bad boss will ever give you or pay you. And I think that's an important point. But one of the things I did, I was speaking to a lovely lady who I'm coaching at the moment or about to coach, and we were talking about a bad board member or a really aggressive and cantankerous board member who just tells people what he wants to tell them and doesn't really have any respect for anybody else. And the chairman of the board doesn't really stand up to this person. And I think the important thing is that when I was speaking to this lovely lady and she said, oh, maybe I should just leave. And I said, you know what I always say, and maybe this is a bit of a cheeky person in me, I always say, if you feel that you're going to be leaving, or if you feel that's just not enough, and if you have the energy and the stamina, give it a go to have your say. and at least try and make it a better place to work for the people who you leave behind who are still working under that boss. So, you know, you report them to HR, or you report them to the boss, or you do something with it, because don't roll over is what I'm saying. Put a fight up, give it a go, because at the end of the day, half of the reasons why bad bosses survive is because they're allowed to. Nobody takes them on, and everybody, as I said when I started this webinar, kind of scuttles around them like crabs. And of course, when they see crabs scuttling around them, i.e. people, often people who are unwell, I think, or power hungry, really enjoy that. They get their jollies from the fear and trepidation of others, and therefore their bad behavior is actually increased. But if you've got somebody who takes them on, often the behavior, they will shrink back and start to behave differently. So moving forward, how we can help, you could go and have a look at what we do. Some of you know what we do. We do international leadership and team development. Have a little scoot around our website if you're interested. We're actually in the process of updating the website. We've got a brand new website happening or coming probably the next month, and we're really excited about that. But what I also like to offer you is to offer you a free strategic review if you would like. I spend an hour with you. You go to my time trade. That's the link, but what will happen after this webinar is my PA MJ will ask you whether you are interested to have a free strategic review, which you're most welcome to do, and I will talk about any issues that you may have in your organization. It doesn't have to be about a boss. It could just be overall some of the things that you deal with or some of the things that you're struggling with. But it's been an absolute pleasure working with you tonight. There's been so many of you on the line, some of you from overseas actually, some from Denmark, some from the States. I have no idea how you hear about us, but it's always a pleasure to have international visitors. So go onto the website, see what we offer. You're very welcome to contact me. I think my email address is somewhere. If you wanted to contact me directly, you just go to info@puremagicbusiness.com.au. Or as I said, you have a look around the website, which is there, or MJ will get in touch with you tomorrow or the next day and see if there's anything you'd like to discuss with me if you would like to. So are there any other questions that you may have at this stage, or any other comments that you'd like to make? I'm available for any questions that you may have. Oh, you're very welcome, Kim. Kim says, thank you, Kim. That was very enjoyable. Thank you, Alan. I think it was fabulous. You're very welcome. And please join me next month. Every month we have these webinars I put on for all people like you, so that my whole great thing around leadership is to upskill 1,000 leaders each year. So do you have any advice to help workplaces and staff recover after a bad boss? I think there's a lot of things you can do, Caroline. One of them would be to do some supervision, have some debriefing. I know you do most organizations or many offer the EAP process, which I think people can be very helped around. Sometimes, it sounds crazy, but I think you'll agree, sometimes workplaces or teams, I'm thinking about an organization that we worked in over the last year, and they had a boss who was so vile. I don't quite know how else to describe this person. She was so demeaning of her staff and so critical of them that when she left, and I was then doing a team development day with them, there were 12 of them in the team, and it was a team development day, and probably, so let's say it was an 8-hour day, 3 of that 8-hour day I was actually doing a debrief with them, Caroline, and I was actually helping them. They were traumatized. They were actually traumatized. So what can you offer them? Counseling, you can offer them supervision, group supervision, probably the team training turned into a bit of counseling plus coaching plus a bit of supervision. And when I saw that same team about a month ago, I'd say, I cannot believe the change in the team. So we finished the team development on the day, lots of positive things, and the manager who came in after the absolute file manager is the most gorgeous man. He is just the most wonderful leader. So I think one of the strategies is to give them a great leader. But EAP, supervision, the new leader, to spend some time with them, take them to, you know, do the human thing. Take them to bowling, or take the people who are left behind for a pizza. You know, bond a little bit with them, because in many ways the team, but also their souls, have been so fragmented through having a boss like this that it takes time as well, Caroline, to recover. You know, they're not going to be right in a month or even 6 months. It might even take them a year or so. But the real question that I would have, or my greatest concern, is why has that boss been able to stay and to desecrate the team so much that when they leave, some of them are so traumatized? And absolutely what it is, if that person wasn't the CEO, let's say, then where was the CEO, or where was their manager, where was their leader, their director? How has this person got so far and had absolutely no pulling of rank around their behavior? That's my real question. So I hope that's answered your question, Caroline. It's been an absolute pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. I'm about to go on to another webinar now, which is called something along the lines of, so I do them back to back. The first one I'm doing tonight is about the Pure Magic Leadership, and the second one I'm running is for the Empowering Women to Thrive, which I always also run. And this is called Heck, We Are So Different. Can my partner and I last the distance? So it's a bit fun, that one. But you know, it's really interesting around women and relationships, and how so many relationships fall apart and don't need to. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. I've loved being with you tonight. God bless, and see you next month. Take care. Bye.